I was once talking to Boomer Esiason, and I told him if there was a list of a combination of playing career and media career all time, he'd be on it. Probably top 10, maybe even higher. From an NFL MVP to having called more Super Bowls than anyone in history to a dominant morning talk show in New York, Boomer Esiason has had a run. We'll get into all of that with Boomer. As you are, Boomer, the main event. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Andrew. Thanks for having me on. And I appreciate all those nice things you just said because I'm sure you wrote a lot of bad things about us when we first started at WFAN. And here we are some 18 years later, which is amazing.
I probably would have written bad things. At that point, I was at ESPN, so I don't think I did when Imus left and you came in. So I kind of missed that time. But then I think I made up for it, especially with Craig when I came back.
Yes, you did.
That might have been Craig's doing.
Well, it's all part of the shtick, I guess. It's all part and parcel to being in media and being a lightning rod, which Craig certainly was, and Gio certainly is. So when you work with guys like that that have very powerful opinions, even though that Craig 90% of the time was wrong, it makes for very interesting fodder in the newspaper for sure.
100%. All right. To listen to the whole podcast, go to andrewmarchand.com, andrewmarchand.com. We're sponsored by WSC Sports. It's time consuming for your editors to create vertical videos, but it's how fans watch content today. So work with WSC Sports to automate vertical video creation. Use their SDK to get stories, reels, and moments style content directly in your owned and operated apps and websites. If you're a league or team or network, go and Google WSC Sports, go to the right-hand corner and tell them Marchand sent you. Boomer, when we go back in your career, I grew up. You're kind of in my prime. You, Dan Marino, Elway, that class. Younger viewers and listeners may not realize how great a player you were. Probably borderline. I had Chase McCourty on a couple weeks ago where I said it wasn't a Hall of Famer, and then he's had a great career. You're borderline. Could have, if you won a Super Bowl, maybe you get in there, but MVP, great career. My question for you to start off is, you're kind of a little bit ahead of your time. Frank Gifford, others, of course, have done it, but you went right from the playing field to the number one booth, ABC Al Michaels. How did that happen?
Well, it was interesting. In the early 90s, I took a job with USA Network in the off season covering the World League of American Football. And back then, I think it was me, Dan Marino, and Warren Moon were all doing that in the off season. So that's where I got to meet Craig Janoff and Kenny Wolf, the director and producer of Monday Night Football. Now, they had been covering me, of course, because we were one of the more popular teams in the 80s. And I became really close friends with them. And I did 2 years with them on USA Network. It was a Monday night game. Most of the times we found ourselves down in Birmingham or San Antonio, but I would say that it was the same format as Monday Night Football. So they saw me. I was working with Brad Nessler back in the day, and our sideline reporter was a guy by the name of Michael Barkan out of Philadelphia. So we had a really great booth. We had a lot of fun. We did 20 games together. I think we did some playoffs as well. So those guys saw me in the early 90s and they felt really comfortable with me. So when it came time for me to retire, which they thought was going to be after the 96 season, they did offer me the job back then. I said no, I wanted to go back and play one more year. And then after my 1997 final season in Cincinnati, they finally came to me and said, if you don't take it now, we're going to move on. And I felt like at the age of 37, I've accomplished pretty much everything I could in the NFL except winning a Super Bowl, that I would take a job that I thought would last 25 years. And lo and behold, little did I know it was going to last only 2 years.
Give us a little taste working with Al Michaels. What was that like for you, and how'd that go?
So when I first started, I was with Dan Dierdorf and Al Michaels, and I'll never forget doing that first Hall of Fame game with those guys. And Al Michaels walking out of the booth saying, this is going to be Emmy driven or Emmy winning or something. And I think he was really jacked up that I was in there, and I felt really good about it. And then at the end of that season, they unceremoniously let Dan Dierdorf go. And I remember there were some writings in the newspapers that somehow he and I weren't getting along, when in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. We actually played a lot of golf together on the roads. We went out to dinner together on the road. And I was stunned that they were not bringing him back. And I remember throwing a kind of a going away party for him at the Pro Bowl in Honolulu that year, because we would cover the Pro Bowl at ABC. So then the next year it was me, Al, and Leslie Visser. And I thought everything was going great. And then we had a game against Denver and the Raiders. I was talking to Al Davis before the game. I got all this information from the Raiders. And then Al Michaels told me in the booth that if you mention his name, you're going to get dead air. We don't get along with Al Davis. And I didn't know the whole story behind the story. Nobody ever told me. So there was a real disconnect from that point on that I could feel. It was palatable. I could feel it. I remember out of the blue, I got a call from Beathard, who was the GM for the San Diego Chargers, wondering if I was going to come out of retirement or would I come out of retirement and come play for them. And that came out of the blue, and I'm like, where's that coming from? And then the next thing I know, Howard Katz, who had just been hired at ABC Sports as, I think, president or executive producer, called my agent and said, I think we're going to move on from Boomer. So that was after the Super Bowl between the Titans and the Rams. So I was caught a little off guard, and I was a little shaken, to be honest with you.
So wait, Al Michaels didn't want you to mention Al Davis?
Al, Dan, and Frank had an issue with the Raiders. And I don't really know totally what the issue was, Andrew, but it was something really significant. That's all I can tell you. And I remember the next year, because I had taken the Westwood One radio job the next year doing Monday Night Football. So I was actually in the same stadiums with all the guys that fired me. And interestingly enough, Dennis Miller was added to the booth along with the great Dan Fouts. And I didn't have any axe to grind with those guys. They weren't after my job the year before. This came out of the blue that I ended up getting fired. And I remember seeing Dennis Miller at a game in Oakland, and he goes, man, whatever you told Al Davis about whatever happened in Denver, man, I thought that Al Michaels and Al Locasal, who was the PR guy for the Raiders at the time, were going to meet under the table and fight. And the way Dennis Miller told me that was hilarious. So, I mean, these are all things that you learn and you're young and you're not really aware of what's happening around you. And, like I said, I got thrown right into that number one booth, which was unprecedented, but I have to say it was well worth it, even though for I guess that last year was really rough, the second half of the season.
Well, that's why I give you a lot of credit, because you come out, you're kind of rookie of the year as a media person, and then you get punched in the face, knocked down, you get back up, and you're here now. To upgrade and listen to the rest of this podcast, andrewmarchand.com, andrewmarchand.com.